Hello world of YouTube and welcome to my next Reformatted Discography review, the segment where I'm going to be taking a look at all of the old discography reviews that I did back in the day, recontextualizing them in the new format, and talk about any records that they may have dropped between when I last talked about the discography and now. And today, we're going to be talking about the Iowa metal icons, Slipknot, a band that needs very little introduction in the heavy metal scene. They're one of the bigger heavy metal bands, not just in roster size, but also in notoriety. Even in a decade where they weren't necessarily the most prolific, they've continued to be very successful. They have their own festival now. They have been thrown heaps of success over the last 10 years since I last talked about them. And I'm going to talk about all 7, yes 7, of their records today. So let's go ahead, dive on in. Yeah, I am going to be talking about Made, Feed, Kill, Repeat because it is a weird project that I feel like Slipknot fans don't address. Obviously, it's far from my favorite release, and it has some glaring issues, but it's an interesting experiment. It's the only record with Anders Colsefni on vocals, who has a much more vintage death metal growl to him. It fits the very lo-fi production that coats a lot of this release. The guitars on here are very sort of vintage death metal in sound. Like the shredding on here isn't as flashy sounding as it is when it's in later releases. The playing on here is fine. A lot of the ideas on here they explore in later releases like Gently, Only One, Tattered and Torn. The main riff on the first song, in the comments of that video, you'll see people saying like 0.1, 0.5, sick. It's the same riff pattern and breakdown. It's just a lot slower. And that's the whole thing of this record. It's not necessarily the same fast-paced, jittery band that they became just one album later when they added Corey Taylor into the mix. It's a lot slower in pace. And there's some sounds on here that still feel indebted to what Slipknot became as far as like the weird sample work and creepy, ominous noises. But this is also a fucking bizarre record because they embrace a big Mr. Bungle influence that I was not aware of until I listened to this project. I mean, Do Nothing Bitch Slap, the version of Tattered and Torn that's on here, or Confessions to a degree because of how prominent Paul's slap bass is. It's weird and funky. There's a bit of a lounge feel on Do Nothing. It's a bizarre thing I didn't expect to hear, but when you think about it, you know, Mr. Bungle used to wear masks on stage. Slipknot wear masks on stage. So, I mean, that correlation makes a little bit of sense. But given what, in hindsight, what Slipknot became, listening to this record is an interesting experience. It's almost like listening to Like Linus by the Deftones, if you've ever listened to that demo, which I'll also be recovering in my Deftones Reformatted Discography review. And Anders' vocals, again, fit this sound, but they don't necessarily fit Slipknot. The rapping on Only One is a lot less refined, and it doesn't help maybe that it's slower paced as well, and the production just doesn't suit it. But it's an album with a lot of decent ideas that are just done better later on down the line, and the ones that aren't redone later on down the line seemingly make sense given the direction the band took. This is really for morbid, curious fans. There's a reason why it's on the bottom of my list, even if I don't mind the vintage production that makes it sound like this weird cross between like Cannibal Corpse and Mr. Bungle at points, and Mushroom Headish at points too. Again, the feud between those two makes a lot more sense with this record than anything else Slipknot did later on down the line. But it's a weird experience that I feel like is for diehards only. Don't look into this if you're just a casual Slipknot fan, or if you're looking to get into Slipknot, don't start here. So Slipknot have never written a transitional record, an album to kind of shift sound from one thing to another. They've just kind of done new things. They've tried to expand on things, which I'll get to, you know, throughout this review. But the Gray Chapter feels like a point where they were really just trying to do something starkly different than what they were exploring 5 years before. And I don't think it helps that though they were going through a tumultuous time writing the Gray Chapter, because this album is obviously in tribute to Paul Gray, who passed away between records. Joey Jordison left, so there was some real frustration there. And this record just feels caught up in its own frustrations. You know, it's trying to do something new, but doesn't necessarily know how to approach that. This record is a lot more aggressively driven, in more of the vein of like an Iowa or like the newest record, but it doesn't lose a lot of its melodies and sense of a good hook, like the new record does. And that's why I feel like it's a weird transitional piece. They wanted to incorporate noise again in a way that was, you know, of a similar style to their older stuff, without outright trying to recreate the absolute ferocity of an album like Iowa. And it leads to some cool moments. I like the sort of psychotic babbling on Custer. I like the noise. I like the atmosphere on the track If Rain Is What You Want. I think the song the one that kills the least is fine. It's got an awkward hook because the title is so long. But again, it's something different for Slipknot. And I like the riff work on AOV and Skeptic. AOV in particular reminds me of classic Slipknot in a more contemporary sense. But the record is just marred by mediocrity and forgettable structure. Like, this is a record I don't revisit often, because when I look back at this record, I just don't remember a whole lot about it. Like, it's fine. I don't think it's bad by any stretch of the imagination. I certainly obviously think it's better than Mate, Feed, Kill, Repeat. But out of the Corey era records, this is my least favorite by a decent margin. Like, it's got decent hooks on, like, Kill Pop and on The Devil and I. It's got some decent riff work. The drumming is fine. The parts where it gets real blast beat centric and all that sort of stuff. It's heavy, but it's just muddled in this whole mess of gray that it just leads to an uninteresting experience. It's the one record in the discography that I feel like you could really cherry pick your favorite songs and be done with the rest. It's the one point where you don't really necessarily need to get there. You can listen to it if you're getting into Slipknot and want to hear more just heavy shit, but it's not as memorable as Iowa. It's not as forward-thinking as their newest record. It's just kind of there in their discography. I think there's something to be marveled at Slipknot trying to recapture the success of Volume 3 by expanding on those that album's sounds, because I like parts of this record. I like the opener Gematria. I dig the choruses of tracks like Sulfur and Dead Memories. I don't think they're my favorite Slipknot songs, but they do a decent enough job. Psychosocial, while a little more derivative of a track like The Blister Exists, is still a decent enough cut. And I like some of the weirder vignettes they took in this record, like Butcher's Hook and Gihanna, and I love the riff on Wherein Lies Continue. I think that it's a nice, kind of slower, lurching song. Even in my original review, I didn't really like this album all that much. I thought it was okay, and I still think it's just fine. It's nothing super offensive. I think that it's the most derivative Slipknot record because, again, they're trying so hard to capitalize and to expand upon what made Volume 3 such a successful experience. You know, I just feel like it didn't necessarily nail it on its head, in my opinion. I feel like if you like Volume 3 and you want to hear more Volume 3, you should get to this record. It's a decent enough, like, sidestep. It's got some good ideas explored on it. It's got some cool riff work. There's some tracks that I don't like as well that try something new, like Vendetta. I don't think that the herky-jerky vocals with that kind of riff work works at all. I think it's an awkward song. And I don't think Snuff is as good of a ballad as anything on Volume 3 at all. I think that it's the cheapest moment on the record to me personally. I think that they've written much better ballads than Snuff. But it's a fine enough record. I feel like, again, it's a nice next place to go if you liked Volume 3. You could do far worse. They really just elevated it to the next level on When You're Not Your Kind. I was genuinely surprised by how much better it sounded than The Gray Chapter. Because I'll be honest, The Gray Chapter, like, made me nervous about Slipknot, because I already was kind of underwhelmed by elements of All Hope Is Gone, but this just was great. I love the focus on atmosphere and really incorporating some truly darker edges that I feel like were prevalent in some of their earlier material, because they had some unsettling like sample work and a focus on atmosphere that was very horror themed, and I feel like they updated that aesthetic and gave it a different type of edge on this record. Like the beginning, Insert Coin has this like really digital synthesized focus that I think works for the band. I love the pianos on Spiders. I like the interludes of What's Next and Death Becomes Death. I think that they play really well in transitioning the record into its more heavier moments as well, like Nero Forte, one of my favorite moments on the record. The intensity on that track is palpable. I love how Insert Coin bleeds into Unsainted, which is an incredible fucking song with a great hook. That is them sort of doing what they tried to do on the Gray Chapter so much better. They refined what they were trying to do on that project and executed it well on Unsainted, Nero Forte, Solway Firth. Like the closer Solway Firth is another killer fucking tune with some true potency and how intense it is. But I also like the softer moments on here. I like that they didn't abandon that prospect. You know, Liar's Funeral is amazing. I already mentioned Spiders is kind of a softer moment, just with a horror-tinged edge. This record is honestly incredibly solid. I feel like this is the best next step for this band to go towards. You know, I think it's truly impressive, and it has me actually excited to see what they do next for a band that I was so passionate about back in the day. I'm glad that they sort of reignited my passion with a record that is really well written, incredibly well performed, and just as a whole unit, they feel so cohesive on this project, you know. Again, not my favorite. I think that I like that it's evolving the band in a proper step. I think it's just hard for me personally to top some of the highs that are in their initial run of records. The run from their debut through Volume 3 is just that good, guys. I mean, they transcend the nu metal genre perfectly in that run. But this is a great next step for them. It has a lot of traditional metal feels to it in a way that I think Slipknot were, again, trying to toy with on parts of All Hope Is Gone, and even on Volume 3, and I feel like they transition away from Volume 3 perfectly on this project. I feel like if you enjoyed Iowa, you'll like this record, because the intensity on here reminds me a lot of the intensity on Iowa, just, again, in a more contemporary sense, in a very classic feeling sense. If you like parts of Volume 3, you'll probably enjoy a lot of this record as well. It introduces melody in a way that was started on Volume 3, but fleshed out in a different way. It's a great fucking record, and a big surprise for me personally from last year. I was thinking I was not gonna like this record as much as I used to, because I just don't listen to this style of music anymore. You know, I still have a soft spot for it and for their first record, but I felt that I would like the newest record more, just because, again, I don't listen to stuff that's like jump the fuck up anymore. But goddamn, if there isn't just something so visceral and primal and immediately frustrated about Iowa that is not explored on any of their other releases. This had a tumultuous recording process to it, and you can tell there is a lot of frustration and anger that the band is working through on Iowa that comes across so very well. It is a record of adolescent disenfranchisement at its peak, while, again, transitioning more towards some of the hook-centric writing that was present on their debut, but done to its sort of nu metal peak on here with tracks like People Equal Shit, which has this just guttural, visceral chorus, or tracks like Everything Ends, My Plague, or Left Behind, which have these gargantuan choruses that would set them up to do more of those on the following record. This, again, you could argue is a transitional record, but it's doing so much more than just transitioning from the self-titled to Volume 3. It is doubling down on some of the aesthetics that worked well from the debut. Like, there's not really much rapping on here, like what was on the debut, but there is still a lot of big, beefy riffs. That nu metal edge focus that was on the debut is here, but it's harnessed in more of a groove-centric fashion. The blast beats on here, blast beat so much harder. The overall atmosphere of this record is just dark and angry, and it is executed very, very well. Like, I was shocked at how just comforting it was to sit down and listen to Iowa, because it's a record that I, again, do not spend often. As much as I used to love Slipknot, kind of burnt through them in my teenage years, but damn if it was not an enthralling experience to listen to. If you like metal in a contemporary sense and you haven't listened to Slipknot for some reason, listen to Iowa. Start with Iowa. If you're purely just a metal fan and you want a very metal experience, listen to Iowa. It is a cathartic, angry record in its rawest, most potent sense. You know, if you like technical, you know, if you're a Converge fan, you might not like Iowa. But if you like metal in a very contemporary sense, if you like a lot of what bands like Code Orange are doing and you haven't listened to Iowa, maybe give it a try. I mean, Corey's vocals just sell this record. He is so goddamn mad, and the band is just so good. Like, there's a moment that puts this record almost above the debut. It's not, obviously, because it's here on the ranking, but on Left Behind, there's a moment where they incorporate more of an alternative metal edge in the bridge when the guitar comes in, when the, like, reverb-soaked, almost New Romantics, Duran Duran sound guitar comes in. It's a moment I never remembered and was like, what the fuck is this band doing? They're doing some crazy shit on here. And it's good. It's so very good. I had such a great time revisiting this record, and I feel like you will too if you throw it on. If you haven't thrown it on in a while, give it a spin. It's worth it. This record is so great. As someone who used to be a gigantic nu metal fan, I like a lot of this record, man, and I like what Slipknot were doing on here. They were trying to do something very different with the genre of nu metal by incorporating things like blast beats and raw guitar production in a way that was not prevalent on a Korn record or a Limp Bizkit record or a fucking Soulfly record. The production on here is so much more raw and, again, visceral. Slipknot are a visceral band in general. They're like a gnarled beast with gnashing teeth. But this debut just gets it, man. Like, the opening blast beats on Sick alone are just heavier than anything most of their contemporaries were doing. They put that up against great choruses like on Wait and Bleed or Spit It Out. They threw these incredibly sinister atmospheres on tracks like Tattered and Torn and Eyeless. Beautifully, Corey's rapping on this record, I could see turning some people off because it is like boiling nails in a blender, but that is one of my favorite parts about it. The rapping on Spit It Out and No Life is just like sandpaper to the ears in the best way possible. And I feel like if you are against nu metal as a principle, you're not gonna like their debut. But if you're like, okay, nu metal's fine, but like, I wish it were heavier, and you never listen to Slipknot, listen to Slipknot. This is a gateway record for nu metal fans. I feel like the Iowa is a gateway for like metalheads. This is a gateway for like nu metal fans because it's got some real jump the fuck up moments. It's got some, you know, very primal riffs, but it's a lot of fun, and they do again some cool shit sonically with the nu metal foundation that I wish more bands looked at and wanted to expand upon, because they do a little bit on Iowa again, but it's not like it is here, and it's something different, dude, and it's so nice. I like their debut a lot, man. It's a record that, again, I thought I would not like revisiting, but I had so much fun with that record. Mixie wants to say hello. Mixie wants to say hello. Want to say hello to World of YouTube? If you haven't listened to it in a while, throw it on. You might be pleasantly surprised at how much you walk away enjoying. And I put caveats on the last 2 records for getting people into this band. I didn't do that with the post Volume 3 material because Volume 3 is truly just like a modern metal classic in my eyes. Like, this was my gateway into Slipknot. Technically, it was the first record of theirs that had come out after me listening to singles from their self-titled and really falling in love with this band. But once I got my hands on this record, I was like, man, these guys just did it. They did that. You know, I like how they incorporate weird sonic ideas into their more melody-centric vocals, like on the opener to Prelude 3.0. I love the breakneck pace of a track like The Nameless that goes from these heavy, incredibly dense, pulse-pounding instrumentation into this soaring, beautiful chorus out of nowhere. It's their way, I feel like, of incorporating elements of Mate, Feed, Kill, Repeat into the Corey era, you know, and there's alt-metal classics on here, like Duality and Pulse of the Maggots and Before I Forget. There's understated ballads, not just the Vermilion songs, which Vermilion Part 2 is beautiful. Corey's vocals on that are gorgeous, but also Circle is a very underrated and understated ballad from this record. The heavy, heavy moments, like 3-0, which has a lot of cool sample work that was woven in through Iowa and the debut. You know, the Blister Exists with its snare breakdown is dope. There's a lot of cool-ass moments on here that make this a contemporary metal classic. One of the best records of the 2000s, in my humble opinion. Like, if I were doing, like, top 50 records of the 2000s, this is probably end up on there. It's that good. You know, Slipknot channeled, again, adolescent frustration and coming-of-age disenfranchisement even better than they did on Iowa with Volume 3, because they injected a lot of the tragedy that one may feel during that era of their life into this project. And it may sound like, just because I grew up with this record, I came of age with this record, that's why it hits me so hard. But I mean, looking at it from a production perspective, the production on here is fucking aces. They kept what made those first 2 records memorable still there with this project, even though they injected a lot more catchiness and melody. They didn't lose that heavy potency that was on the previous 2 projects. This is the gateway record into Slipknot, if you ask me. You know, if you want a record to start with this band, it's this. You know, because you have the soft moments, you have the great choruses, you have the intensity. It's all here in one perfectly composed package. It is a classic. It is such a good record, and it's personally my favorite Slipknot project. And that's going to be my Slipknot discography review. Thank you so very much for watching. Did you like it? Did you not? Let me know in those comments down below. If you did like it, be sure to give it a like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerdy content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons. If you would like to join their ranks and see all of the other reformatted discography reviews that I've made, because there's a couple that haven't hit the channel yet that have meatier versions of them on the Patreon, including this one. There's a meatier version of this on the Patreon where I talk about my thoughts on the band as the years have gone on. I talk about my original discography review versus now. It's linked in the description. It's a more extended cut. Gives you more to see. That's linked down there. But I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so very much for watching again. I've been Val Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations. And I'll see you another day.